Coming up on this edition of Press Watch 2012, agenda setting and gatekeeping aren't just the job of the media anymore. The changing landscape of who decides what's newsworthy. And remember those third-party candidates for president? Vaguely, maybe. Why they don't get equal play in the national news. And later, Fox News on election night. The questionable quality of some television production decisions. Welcome to Press Watch 2012. I'm Wendy Brunner. Press Watch is a production of the Mass Communications Department at Oklahoma City University, made possible by the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. Today is a special day for Press Watch. We are wrapping up our series. We've spent many months now watching national news media coverage of the presidential campaign. We've been examining ethical issues and political reporting, but now the election is over, the semester is coming to an end. So today, we're going to reflect on what we've taken away from this entire process. And I can't think of a better way to do that than to introduce you to the students who have been the driving force behind Press Watch all along, our big thinkers in this organization. Our OCU Mass Communications majors, Stephen Leahy, Rachel Morris, and Zach Jacobs. I started to say welcome, but this is your show, so I don't need to welcome you to your own show. We really wanted to make today kind of a special show and allow all of you the opportunity to kind of weigh in on some of the things that we've been talking about throughout the entire course of this election. We wanted to revisit some of the big issues maybe, or talk about the things that we've left on the cutting room floor, you know, as we've been planning this show. So I really wanted each of you to have an opportunity to kind of show off and expound upon what you've been interested in and what you're thinking about. So each one of you is going to take a little segment, and we're going to start with you, Rachel, and I'd like you to talk about, you were interested in social media and what was happening there. Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, who is deciding what we're talking about anymore, this gatekeeper theory. And I've personally noticed over the past year an enormous change in who's setting the agenda for the news. I saw it with the Aurora shootings over the summer, and I saw what CNN was doing, taking Twitter feeds and putting that and making that a story, and you saw it all over the election. You saw it starting with the GOP, you saw it with the debates, and you saw it up until the very last night of the election. So I want to go ahead and show our first clip that kind of introduces what is changing in this landscape, and it's from CNN.
So what we want to do is give you a voice, give you an opportunity to state, these are the issues that are most important to me in this election, and ultimately to get some of your questions to the candidates.
I think this is interesting is that I've noticed CNN has been doing this a lot more than a lot of other stations, but I've seen ABC and NBC also using this technique of trying to get your voice. We want to hear from you. And we saw that so much, especially during the debates, setting the agenda for what news coverage actually was. And so kind of a question I want to throw out to you guys just to discuss is, when did this happen? I mean, I noticed it over this past year, like I was saying over the summer, but when did we decide that the audience is setting the agenda for the newscast?
Great question. Very good question. I honestly wonder if it's the evolution of technology and how networks are now trying to shorten the distance between the viewers and themselves to try to get them more involved. Yeah. Maybe it could be the drop-off in ratings that a lot of networks have seen because of the rise of a lot of folks getting their news on the internet, and this is just a way to connect them together, especially with a younger demographic that might not watch network news nearly as much as an older generation. That's just my take. Yeah, and do you think that it's changed? I mean, Twitter's been out there, it's been there for a while. What's changed between 2008 and now?
I think the biggest difference is that there's an emphasis on interactivity. I mean, we have not only the news, but also commercial programs that do a lot of focus on creating interactive entertainment. And when you have something as focused on informing the public and reading the public as news, it makes sense that they would turn to such things as Twitter, as Facebook, and other things like that to see what we're talking about and how we understand the world around us.
And when you're talking about how we understand the world, do you think that the way we understand it is different than the original gatekeeper, the media? So do you think that's changed the content of the news?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a much more narrow view of the world. We see what is around us instead of having a network that gives us the opportunity to see a whole view of the landscape. We have a small slice. And any time that that's given national prominence, it can have an effect.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Zach? I know that you've been watching presidential elections for many years. What do you think the difference in the content of the newscast is?
Part of me wonders whether Twitter and the use of social media itself is becoming news in and of itself, whether it's kind of jumped over again from an interactivity between the studios or the networks and viewers themselves and actually becoming news. I mean, this is one thing that we covered earlier on in the season was how the networks were covering it. Now, while some networks, for instance, during debates or during the convention, NBC, for instance, was one network that I saw a perpetual feed of tweets from anybody and everybody who happened to be political thinkers, think tank folks, talking heads, or the average Joe or Jane that happened to have something that was poignant. So for this to happen, it seems to me that this is maybe making news out of something that was supposed to be a way to relay news.
Yeah, and I want to just really quickly, we're not going to have that much time, but let's look at this one clip about the binders full of women comment. And this was something that I think was incredible in the way that this comment just set the tone for newscasts. So let's take a look.
I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women.
So everyone was wondering going into the debate last night whether women's issues would come up in a significant way. You heard it did. According to Reuters, it was President Obama's pitch to women that put Governor Romney on the defensive, which then led to that widely talked about and tweeted comment from the governor about binders full of women.
Well, that was Governor Mitt Romney last night responding to a question during the debate about equality in the workplace. As soon as he made that remark, a firestorm erupted on the internet. Social media users and others jumping at the chance to create news feeds full of jokes. One web-savvy guy creating a, quote, binders full of women Facebook page. It has more than 280,000 likes.
Let me tell you something. While we're all sitting there on that debate stage, there's an entire, world of conversations going around that we are unaware of on Facebook, on Twitter. It was not one of those things that registered at all to me.
It's just mind-blowing that the moderator of the debate had no idea that this one phrase was going to be the topic of conversation for up until now. I would say people are still talking about this. It's still a hot button issue. It's just incredible, Wendy.
It is. I just have to jump in and say the word that you're using, gatekeeper, is so fantastic with what Candy Crowley just said, because you're right. She was the moderator of the debate, and she was the moderator because she is an expert. And so what's really interesting about this social media phenomenon is that news is no longer decided by these people who are kind of removed and experts on whatever arena. Instead, we are becoming facilitators for discussion, for discourse. And I think that's a really wonderful kind of role reversal, because we're taking the information flow away from the people who are kind of removed and who are experts, and putting it in the hands of the people who need to receive the information. And so what doesn't necessarily resonate with an expert clearly is resonating with the rest of us. And I think that's a wonderful advance in the process.
Absolutely. And what about you guys, just kind of capping off with this binders comment? What do you think the audience was thinking when they saw this comment that the anchors or the news people didn't think?
I personally think that this was a typical gaffe that's made by most any presidential candidate or any candidate in pretty much any sort of race. So this one being on such a national stage, just a slip of the tongue, and I'm not trying to sound like an apologist for anybody, but this is going to happen almost any election, and it just happened to happen. It just happened to take place during an election where social media was much more prevalent than 4 years ago, hence the explosion.
And you know, I'm not even sure I'm comfortable calling it a gaffe. I mean, it was an awkwardly phrased sentence, but it also happened to be quite true. He did have literally binders full of resumes of women, and I think that we look so often on the internet for entertainment value, for something funny, a punchline, that people watching it were ready to create that, not only just to comment on it, but also to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see the shift and to see where we've come from and how news has developed over time. But, I mean, that's news, it's always developing. But let's go ahead and see what's coming up next on Press Watch. Stephen Leahy will take a look at third-party candidates in the presidential election. Are they taken seriously, or does the media like a lopsided race? When we come back.
Welcome back to Press Watch 2012, where we're looking at the national news media and ethics. We've been watching the presidential election for many months now. Now that it's all over with, my students, who are the producers of Press Watch, they're weighing in. We've been talking about some of the bigger issues from the election cycle, some of the things that we were interested in that we found relevant for the last few months. So, Stephen, you wanted to talk about third-party candidates.
Yes, and let's dive right in with some coverage from a couple different news organizations on how they view the third-party candidates.
Could votes for third-party candidates swing this year's race? Not being talked about a lot right now. Herb London is with the Hudson Institute, also a former third-party candidate for governor of New York, and he's my guest. Good to see you.
Well, pleasure to be with you.
It's a fascinating topic because we haven't really been discussing this. There are going to be third-party candidates on the ballot, right?
The outcome of the presidential race could be affected by some unlikely candidates that most Americans know little about. We're talking about third-party independents.
Governor Romney's campaign is try to keep him off the ballot. He's on in 49 states, and he's a write-in candidate in the other. I think he's a slight threat to the Republicans. I don't think the others are threats at all. However, Fred, they did bring up points never discussed in the debates. Drugs were never discussed. Having a drug czar was never discussed. I think Obama said he would eliminate it, that we still do have a drug czar. And other things that they all just mentioned were never brought up in the four debates, the one vice presidential and the three presidential. So I think these people deserve to be heard. They're not going to win. They could have an effect.
So, three different views, three different people saying basically that we don't talk a lot about these people. And I'm just wondering, to start off, why don't we give more airtime to third-party candidates? Does anyone have a guess or any intuition on it?
I think that when it comes to the news media, you want the news factor, you want the now, you want what people are going to be interested in, you want what's going to be impactful. And I think a lot of these people, they're not really big. And it's on both sides, because the media is often what brings the attention of people. So it's interesting. I think it's that key thing that you heard in that last clip, they're not going to win. It's just that underlying thought that they're not that important. But as in the Fox clip at the very beginning, they do have an influence on the presidential race, and they do have a great impact, and you've seen historically on the presidential election. So it's an interesting conundrum, because at the same time, you know they're not going to win, and you could look at it from that stance as a media person, or you could look at it from, but they are a key factor in the presidential election.
And not too often have I seen third-party candidates really being given their due, say for, again, the presidential debate that Larry King himself hosted. But it's difficult for me to see that whenever, again, these are issues that do come up, and whenever third-party candidates in the past have indeed played the role of spoiler. 2008 was a big one with, no, check that, 2004 actually was a very big one with Ralph Nader, supposedly, in a lot of people's eyes, taking votes away from John Kerry, hence George W. Bush getting his second term. it makes me wonder why, in light of that, third-party candidates in these past two elections and quite possibly in subsequent elections aren't going to get the coverage that they need. And it is news. It is news.
Oh, Rachel used the, I'm sorry, Stephen, Rachel used the word conundrum that I just want to touch on because you're right, though. It's kind of a vicious circle. So if we go into it thinking, oh, they're not going to win, so we don't give them the news play. But on the other hand, if we gave them equal coverage, would they have a better shot?
I think that's a great idea. And also, we aren't talking about their issues. As he had said, there were a whole number of issues that hadn't been on the table until that debate. Any reactions on that?
Well, I think that that is probably one of the biggest reasons we should talk about them. And that's something that I wish the news would talk about more, is these issues instead of these people. Instead of asking, like, who's running, who might win, what are they running for, what are the issues that they're fighting for, and maybe these are discussions that we should be having more about.
That makes sense. Well, we've got another issue we want to talk about, another endemic issue, the tightness of the race and how that can affect our coverage. So let's dive right into the next video we have, also from a couple different outlets.
And you know, the media doesn't like a lopsided race, so I actually have predicted that the media are going to declare that Mitt Romney is the winner of the first debate, regardless of actually what happens, because the pendulum cannot sustain itself if it's too lopsided.
Nate Silver says this is a 73.6% chance that the president's going to win. Nobody in that campaign thinks they have a 73. They think they have a 50.1% chance of winning. And you talk to the Romney people, it's the same thing. Both sides understand it is close and it could go either way. And anybody that thinks that this race is anything but a toss-up right now is such an ideologue. They should be kept away from typewriters, computers, laptops, and microphones for the next 10 days because they're jokes.
So that's some strong language. Zach, do you have anything to say about that?
I see a lot of news networks these days that will get some of the insiders sometimes, or a lot of the donors or strategists from either party, who will go on and say, oh, our candidate's going to take 37 states and 500 electoral votes, and just a big expectation. However, the campaigns themselves are very much playing it close to the vest, and smartly so, because if there's any sense of hubris or of bragging that, oh, we are doing so well, the media can pounce on that. News outlets can pounce on that, and it could wind up costing points, not just in polls, but in the eyes of the voters.
And you saw that at the first debate with Chris Christie.
Yes.
Whenever he was saying that Romney was going to do well, you saw media outlets everywhere saying, you can't say that. You can't say that. You're jinxing it. It's just this little game you have to play up until the very end when we see, oh, wait, it wasn't that close of an election.
Right. We're about out of time. Do you have any last thoughts before we move on to another topic?
I was just going to say I wanted to jump on really quickly and say that first commentator in the first clip who said the media doesn't like a lopsided race, I'll just take a really quick issue with that, because I think that the vast majority of journalists who do this job are good at their job and they mean well. And I think that as a professional myself, I never experienced a single journalist who was ever like, oh, bummer, this isn't going to be a close one. Let's figure something out. It just doesn't work that way. So I'm glad you kind of brought this topic up.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And so we're going to have to wrap this up now. But coming up next on Press Watch, Zach Jacobs will take us back through some of the events on Fox News on election night, why Megyn Kelly went on a hike through the halls, and what that said about the tone of their coverage for the night, when we come back.
Welcome back to Press Watch. Today, our students, the producers of Press Watch, are recapping some of the highlights and low lights, kind of ethically speaking, of news media coverage during the presidential election. And Zach, you had wanted us to go back and revisit some of Fox News' coverage from election night.
Yes, I did. And because they have their moniker of fair and balanced, which to a lot of people has become a byword and to a certain extent a joke in the news media. It really has. Not trying to pile on them tonight, but this is just one of the many networks we covered. And even though they were third in order behind calling the ultimate election, behind MSNBC and NBC, there was a lot of hay that was made in the press and over the web and a lot of other places about their coverage. Now, there are many to choose from, but I had to boil it down to just a couple of, or three different ones, and I want to lead off with an interview between Chris Wallace and Karl Rove. Let's take a look.
Well, I have great respect for our decision desk, and I see that they're very happy in Chicago. But I've got to tell you, the Romney camp has real doubts about the call that's been made by us. I'm going to ask you a straight-out question. You went through this in 2000. You almost went through it in 2004. Do you believe that Ohio has been settled?
No, I don't.
With Chris Wallace leading off with that question, he tried to make it as hard journalism as he possibly could, even though he's working on this network. Do you think that he was really trying to seem objective, or was he kind of trying to toe a line with maybe a facade of being truly fair and balanced? I'm looking at your expression, and you've got something on the tip of your tongue.
You know, you try so hard to not take on the persona that has been given to a certain network, even one that is considered as partisan as Fox. And you want so hard to believe that it was objective and it was straight journalism, but I don't believe it. I don't. I really don't. And I feel bad about that, but I don't believe that the way that they went about conducting themselves at that point in the election was correct. Why weren't they talking to the Obama campaign as well? I mean, just the fact that they were getting their information from one source makes you feel, you already get all squirmy inside, and you're like, this isn't right.
And not just one source, but a guy who co-founded the American Crossroads PAC and raised $200 million for the Romney campaign. Stephen, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that I agree with Rachel that whenever a news organization gets their information from one source, you've got a problem. I think that it's a bigger symptom of the problem that Fox News and MSNBC have been trying to address, and that's that entertainment sells, and news can be entertaining, but it's very difficult to make it entertaining and accurate at the same time.
Very much so. Wendy, you got something to add?
I always have something to add, don't I, really?
Actually.
No, I just thought it was interesting that they just like you were all saying about the one-sided information, and I found it really interesting. They have their go-to commentators, their go-to analysts, of course they do. And like you mentioned about MSNBC and Fox being partisan networks, and they've kind of carved out their niche and they're appealing to that niche audience. But I think that for something like an election night, when you have a commentator who is so far involved in the campaign, like you mentioned in the PAC, that it provides a perspective that is almost useless for a journalist because it's so far opinionated one way or the other. And so on something that's as critical as election night, it just felt unbalanced to me.
And you're talking about the lack of balance there. This next clip that we're going to talk about leads off with, I wouldn't say an order or a command, but maybe a really strong suggestion that Karl Rove get down to the bottom of these things and send somebody else out. Let's just take a look at what the tape has.
Here's what we're going to do.
Karl
Rove said that we should figure out what the deal is with this decision desk. The decision desk is in a different place. Megan, I will escort you down the steps here so you can go interview them.
All right.
Watch your step.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to fall
there you go.
in front of all these millions of people.
Okay.
All
Megan is going to go to the decision desk and interview them about the decision on Ohio.
Try to get to the bottom of this. It's right out the door. They used to keep them right here with us in the studio, and then for some reason, whoa, careful. Then for some reason, they moved them down the hall.
My initial thought on this, whenever I watched this, was that this was bad television. Why not get them on get one of the guys from the decision desk and just do a one-on-one? Instead, for time's sake, I cut out the entire 45-second walk, and it's very long and very awkward.
She went all the way down
Yes.
that long hallway, and we just
Yes.
kind of followed her. Yep.
But the initial thing there where Brett Baer said, Karl Rove said we should get to the bottom of this. Does this sound to me like maybe some sort of an on-air marching order, possibly?
I think that it was most likely someone, a producer or a director, saying, you know, we've got contention, we've got conflict, and the best way to get to the bottom of it, the best way to do good news is to see what the truth is, to see what's behind that conflict. And so I think it was a smart move to consult with the desk. I'm just not sure that they went about it the right way.
Rachel, what do you think?
Well, I mean, just the cameraman ran into the wall. So I don't think that it was a very smart production move. It was clearly for the entertainment of people watching.
Yes.
But getting the ultimate decision, that was the smart move. How they did it, I didn't think was very good.
Well, you're talking about the ultimate decision. We've got one more video to run through, and it talks about, well, let's just let the tape speak for itself.
We have brought the two guys together to have a little discussion that may be illuminating to all of us. Karl Rove is now here, along with Michael Barone, who's been back there with the decision desk. And we'd like to refer to this as Cage Match 2012. Bring it. Go. Karl?
No, we're not going to be that impolite.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If there's any credit to give to Karl Rove, it was because he said, we're not going to be that impolite. However, what was going through Megyn Kelly's mind? Was this something that the producers said to try to hype up ratings after the initial letdown of viewers once the race was called? Or what might you chalk this up to?
I agree. It's entertainment. With what Rachel said earlier, we're trying to sell this channel now that the race has been called. There are a lot of angry people. A lot of them are probably watching this channel, and I think that they would like to see some kind of resolution to that anger.
Rachel, what do you think?
I mean, that's exactly what it is. You can't say for sure, but you can probably guess it was a production move to try to get some kind of action to get the really disappointed voters who watch Fox News to stay on air so they can have good ratings still.
Final thoughts, Wendy?
It's just that niche appeal. Again, that's exactly right. I think you're both exactly right. There were disappointed viewers that wanted, I need an explanation for this, and so that's what they were doing. They were looking for the entertainment value as opposed to the objective. Here's the information. It's, all right, now let's react.
Well, thank you all for your input on that, and it's funny to see Megyn Kelly talk about a cage match, but we're coming up next on Press Watch 2012, some parting thoughts from each of us as we wrap up this first season of Press Watch. Our take on the press, the politics, and the process, and months worth of cynicism and discourse, not here in the news, but right here on our set, right after this.
Welcome back to Press Watch 2012. It's the end of an era. Well, not really. It feels like the end of an era for us, anyway. The election is over, so too, that means, is our first season of Press Watch. Our students here at Oklahoma City University have spent months preparing these shows. They've been studying the national news media, debating professional ethics, and what they learned, what they thought, it was always too much to cram into any one episode of this show. So now, each of them is going to take a minute or so to share with you their parting thoughts.
Yes, Wendy. After months of acting as watchdog to the watchdogs, I have emerged from the political vortex, still with my sanity, but also with some interesting observations. One, we all have some form of media bias when it comes to the content we choose to watch. I'm the first to admit I'm a CNN diehard. I can't get enough of my self-proclaimed doppelganger, Aaron Burnett, or the fabulous Wolf Blitzer. And not just because together they seem to create some kind of superhero duo. No, to me, the CNN team is able to successfully separate news from opinion and walk the fine line of news and entertainment. Not saying they're perfect, but when it comes to what I like to see, they nail it. And that's true of the public as well. Another observation I've realized is the more entrenched in the news you get, the more jaded you can become. In our reoccurring segment, Bravos and Blunders, where we look at the best and worst from the media, finding a blunder was always as easy as looking up clips on YouTube. Finding a Bravo, well, that was often a struggle. I found that maybe we, the media, need to take a breath of normal, uncynical air and find the good in our job description instead of just the bad. We have the privilege of daily assessing the human condition, and when that job is done well, it's worth recognizing. Stephen?
Thank you, Rachel. You know, when I first joined the Press Watch team, I knew next to nothing about news broadcasting. I came in from the world of public relations, so I was basically an enemy in their foxhole. It was thanks to Professor Brunner's patience and the support of everyone involved that I was able to contribute to this show. I've learned more than I could have imagined from the process, and can honestly say that I will never see the news the same way again. Thank you, truly. I'd like to give a shout out too to the folks at NPR, particularly the people behind All Things Considered. They've consistently provided neutral, issue-based reporting regardless of the politics, and that's no easy feat. But perhaps the biggest thing I've taken away from Press Watch is this. In an arena of political consultants and battles for ratings, it's not the media, but the viewer who holds the ultimate power. There will always be someone saying exactly what you want to hear, and it's easy to take that as truth. Don't. Whether it's Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, or NPR, keep a healthy skepticism and don't be afraid to change the channel, to watch the other guys. If you want your news to be fair and balanced, you have to be too. Zach?
Thank you, Stephen. The old cliche goes, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. However, I'm glad to be proof positive of this cliche being wrong. I joined this program wanting to see where bias actually existed in the news media, especially regarding politics. And I was amazed to find out that although bias is present in some networks' news coverage, there are those reporters and journalists out there on multiple news outlets who present the raw, unadulterated truth to viewers. And throughout this program, my fellow producers here have challenged me on what media bias actually is, and on my long-held belief that it was almost strictly one-sided. My advisor, Professor Wendy Brunner, lent her invaluable expertise and insight into such a challenging and critical industry. My family put up with me and the long hours I've spent in production meetings, weird schedules, and late nights studying a field that I find so fascinating. And the EEJF provided the funds to give us students the opportunity to study in great deal the free press, one of the elements that keeps our republic truly free. To all of these people and so many more for making this possible, I give my sincerest thank you.
Zach, I absolutely could not have said that better myself. We owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation for making this entire project possible for us. So many of our mass communication students have had just this extraordinary learning opportunity because of this show. And it's not just been our journalism students, it's also been our broadcast students too. So if we can, I want to spin the camera around for a change and take a peek into our control room here at OCU TV and thank Professor Andy Gibson. Andy is a wonderful teacher of broadcasting. He coordinates our crew for us. Thank you, all of our students who have put so much time and effort into all of this. They have done an amazing job producing this show. They have done so much work behind the scenes to make it all happen for us. So thank you all. That is it for this season of Press Watch. This is, as always, a production of the Mass Communications Department at Oklahoma City University, made possible by the Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation. Goodbye.